is animating. And you can see it's actually getting pretty slow. As each ogre is added on, the playback gets slower and slower, and that's basically just to do with, you know, it getting the animation information, and it's also to do with viewport performance. And also don't forget, obviously I'm recording this using a screen capture utility, so that's actually using up quite a bit of CPU power as well. So there we go, we've got our tiny little ogres appearing all over the object, and you can see they're all animating, and it's using an animated offset on the animation as well. Now if I wanted all the ogres to be in sync, what we would do is we would use the next set of animation options, which we can see here, which if you've watched DVD 2 of our series, you'll be very familiar with. You know, most operators at some point when there's any sort of animation being applied to the particles, they have an offset a flyout, and you always have the same options. You have absolute time. In other words, there's a one-to-one mapping between the animation and time. So if we turn that on, all of our ogres will be, if I go back to the first frame, press play, you'll see that they're all now synchronized. They're all using the same animation, even though the particles are appearing at different frames. It doesn't matter what frame the particles are appearing on now, because they're all using this absolute time mapping to get our animation working. If I change it to particle age, we'll get what we had previously. Which is, it's offsetting the animation based on the frame on which the particle is actually birthed. So we get a nice randomization in the animation, so it stops any sort of cycling, any synchronization going on there. This would be pretty cool for doing some sort of crowd scene. Although, you know, it does have its limitations, but you could use it to do a crowd scene. And the last option, which our flow doesn't actually have the facility to show at the moment because we've only got one event, and that is using event duration. And it's the same thing basically as particle age. The animation offset is based on the frame on which the particle enters the event. In this case, we haven't got particles entering a new event, so that particular option is not going to be particularly useful to us. So another thing we can do is we can use an absolute time, and we can use a random offset, turn that on, and we can then set a frame range, and that will obviously also randomly offset our animation as well, and that can give another level of randomness to the offset in our animation, and that can break up any sort of cycles that you might see as well in your scene. So as you can see, you have the option of having full animation, and you know, if I pick the teapot again, go back to the teapot, and we'll go back to the first frame, and press play. There you go. I've got animated shape turned on, and you can see now that our teapots all animate. So, you know, you've got this option. You can either use animated shape with any of these types here, you know, a simple object, a hierarchy, a group, or, you know, an animated object. It'll work with any of those. And obviously you've got the acquire current shape option as well. So the last thing we probably want to get out of our particles is a texture. So I'll just unhide our ogre again. There he is. And I'll go back to the first frame, and I'll press play again, and you can see that our particles are appearing, and they're appearing just using the display operator's color. That's because they actually haven't got any material assigned to them. So if I go back to the first frame and turn on acquire material and press play, you can see we're still not getting the same display as we are over here with the ogre. And that's quite simply because the particles don't have any mapping on them. And you can see that our ogre has been mapped with a checker pattern. The checker pattern needs a UV space to work within, and these particles don't actually have any UV space. They only have a material applied, so that's not going to work very well. So I'll go back to the first frame again, turn on acquire mapping. Now the particles should pick up the UV mapping from the mesh, They have the same material because they're acquiring it from the mesh as well. So when you press play, you can see you get the same material as on the mesh, and you can see it's mapped correctly, and it works as you pretty much would expect it. So there's a lot of flexibility you can see in this operator. It takes quite a bit of explaining, as you can see. It's a very useful operator. Obviously, you know, if you want to do any kind of complex objects, then you know you really want to get familiar with the shape instance operator. And you know, I would very much recommend playing around with this test scene. Get the ogre working with its point cache, and try out different things with it, and see what you can do with it. It's not the sort of thing you really want to try and find out how to use when you're in production. You know, you don't want a shot where you've got, you know, you want to have to create lots of birds or insects or anything like that, and then you very quickly have to learn how to use this operator. You really want to be forearmed with this particular thing. So, as I said, I'd recommend having a good play around with it before moving on maybe to the next operator on this DVD.